He said specifically that Ukraine has been funding the insurgencies that have been taking place in the Sahel states, and that Ukraine is liable for the kind of atrocities and damages that are being done, and loss of lives, of course, that are being caused by these insurgencies in these countries. And this is interesting because we know that Russia has a hand in these Sahel states. It means that there can be a proxy conflict, and that will be a very sad war for Africa to be involved in at this time. Well, Burkina Faso's foreign minister, Jean-Marie Traoré Karamoko, gave his speech at the UNGA about what Burkina Faso is going through and the fact that Burkina Faso needs independence from its colonizers, as well as there is a need to have the Alliance of Sahel States as a registered or recognized organization from ECOWAS, as well as the need to have Africa in the United Nations Security Council. But what was more interesting was the fact that he opined that Ukraine has been supporting insurgencies in the Sahel states, and the fact that these Sahel governments have been having a hard time to fight these insurgencies. But this is just a short explanation of the speech that Jean-Marie Traoré gave at the UNGA, that is the Burkina Faso's foreign minister. And first, one of the things that he spoke about was the progress in the fight against insurgencies in the Sahel. He said that Burkina Faso has really gained a lot of ground. You know that Burkina Faso is under a lot of duress from these groups that are fighting the government of the day, and they are trying as much as possible to recover from the losses that they have had for years and years. And France was in the country to try and support these governments, but recently there has been a wave where France has been told to leave these countries as they have not been successful in assisting these countries to fight the insurgencies from Islamists and other groups that are affecting these nations. So the foreign minister was very critical to say that for the past 2 years, that is for the part where Ibrahim Traoré, of course, the president of the day, has been in power, Burkina Faso has seen a lot of ground being covered in terms of fighting the insurgencies, the extremists in the country, and that they have gained ground from 40% to now 70% of the land that was taken over by these insurgencies have now been reclaimed by the government and are under the control of the government. Also, he was very critical to defend the reputation of the security forces. A lot has been said about the Burkina Faso security forces regarding the way they treat human beings, regarding the way they are doing the operations. He was critical in defending the Burkina Faso security forces, in saying that they are working within the frameworks of international humanitarian laws. They are working within the frameworks of the laws that are governing conflict in such areas, that there is less civilian casualties, and that they are combating the enemy who sometimes hides within the population of the civilians, and that makes it a bit challenging. But he was very critical to say that the way that the Burkina Faso security forces are being postulated outside there, that it is not right, and that they are working within the confines of the law to make sure that they get their country back. Well, another matter that he touched on was that the fact that he accused foreign powers of meddling in the business of the Sahel state. And in this, he gave the position of the Alliance of the Sahel States. Well, the Alliance of the Sahel States includes Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. And these countries, they have something in common. And one thing in common is that they have undergone coups and they are under juntas. So that means that they are under somewhat authoritarian leadership. And ECOWAS was against that because they are members of ECOWAS. But ECOWAS came out and said that they don't support such moves by these countries. Well, they say that if ECOWAS is not going to support us, then we will go ahead and form our own region. And that is what now they are calling the Alliance of the Sahel States. So the foreign minister was critical of foreign powers that are trying to meddle to frustrate this alliance and to frustrate the fact that they can come together and do something for their for their own countries. He said specifically that Ukraine has been funding the insurgencies that have been taking place in the Sahel states, and that Ukraine is liable for the kind of atrocities and damages that are being done, and loss of lives, of course, that are being caused by these insurgencies in these countries. And this is interesting because we know that Russia has a hand in these Sahel states. We know that Wagner has been fighting alongside these governments, trying to offer support, security support to these states. And it is clear that the hand of Russia is very, very firm in these Sahel states. So perhaps this is just another way that Russia is also devising to go against the Western powers. We know that Ukraine is heavily supported by Western powers, including the United States and Western Europe. So perhaps this is also a way that Russia is trying to discredit Western powers by now involving the name of Ukraine very actively in what is going on in the Sahel states. The Sahel states are, as I said, very close to Russia, and now we are seeing the name of Ukraine being popped up, that Ukraine is funding the insurgencies that are affecting these nations and that are causing loss of life. So that was a very, very interesting statement from the foreign minister of Burkina Faso to directly mention Ukraine as one of the supreme funders of the insurgencies that are happening in the Sahel states. Well, another thing that he touched on was the international institutions, and he criticized international institutions by saying that they are not assisting these Sahel states to come back to normalcy, for the governments to have power again, because right now these governments are really fighting to have a formidable force that can repel these insurgencies that are happening in their country. So he said that the international institutions should do more in helping these countries, as well as he took a jab at ECOWAS, because ECOWAS has been sort of an impediment to the Sahel states, to the alliance of the Sahel states forming this bloc of countries that have undergone coups and are led by juntas, that ECOWAS did not want them to have this sort of a region within another region, that it will spill to other countries. So they are saying that these moves are frustrating them, and the fact that these nations in ECOWAS are trying as much as possible to prevent them from fighting the insurgencies that are happening in the country. Lastly, he also touched on the quest for Africa to join the United Nations Security Council. And this is a call that has been similar with all African presidents that have taken stage to the UNGA, and of course also other African foreign ministers that have taken stage to the UNGA, that there is a need for Africa to have a seat at the UN Security Council. And that is a matter in discussion. I've done a whole video about it. You can go and check it, that Africa should be given a seat at the United Nations Security Council. The problem is that these nations that want Africa to be at the UNSC also are limiting the powers that Africa will have at the UNSC. Because if you have a permanent membership at the UNSC, it means you will have the power of veto. And these countries are very, very skeptic. They fear to have another country, regardless of whichever country it will be, maybe India, maybe Brazil, maybe Germany, maybe Africa, represented by the Africa Union. They fear to have Africa as a veto power nation at the permanent UNSC. So regardless of the fact that Africa can be given a permanent status at the UNSC, it is still subject to discussion which perks that Africa will receive should it be given that UNSC position, permanent position at the UNSC. So that is the statement that the foreign minister of Burkina Faso gave at the United Nations General Assembly. Very interesting that now we are seeing them going bold against Ukraine and saying out loud that Ukraine is having a hand at the insurgencies that are happening in their country, that Ukraine is trying to now create some sort of a proxy war, because we know that they are supported by Russia. And when they start saying that Ukraine is on the other side supporting these insurgencies, it means that there can be a proxy conflict, and that will be a very sad war for Africa to be involved in at this time, because Africa has a lot of problems and we have to deal with these problems before we start fighting wars that don't belong to us. So that is the statement by the foreign minister of Burkina Faso.